why the strongest people choose silence. Have you noticed how the world is drowning in noise? I'm not just talking about the noise of machines and voices, but the noise of souls screaming for attention, begging for recognition, thrashing around like fish out of water, gasping for just one validating glance. Everywhere you look, there's this desperate hunger to be seen, to be heard, to prove something to someone. And yet, there are those who walk among us in silence. Not the silence of shyness, not the silence of fear or defeat, but a different kind of silence. A silence that echoes like distant thunder. A silence with weight, substance, presence. Why is it that the truly strong choose this silence? Let me tell you something. Real strength never needed an audience. Think about a mountain. It doesn't announce its greatness, doesn't publish its height in the papers, doesn't hold press conferences to explain how magnificent it is. It simply stands there, towering, silent, indifferent to praise or criticism, and it's precisely that silence that makes it overwhelming. The weak, on the other hand, need the noise. They need to announce every small victory, every step, every thought. Why? Because they don't believe in themselves. They need others to believe first, so that maybe, just maybe, they can borrow that external belief and wear it like it's their own certainty. But here's the paradox. The more you need to prove your worth, the less worth you actually have. The louder you shout about being strong, the more you reveal your fragility. It's as if the very need to convince others is a confession of devastating inner doubt. The truly strong person has already settled this question with themselves. They're not negotiating with the world about their own value. They simply are. And that being doesn't need narration, doesn't need commentary, doesn't need likes or applause. You see, the silence of the strong is the expression of absolute inner autonomy. It's the demonstration that their center of gravity lies within themselves, not out there in the fickle, fluctuating opinions of the crowd. Think about how a centuries-old tree grows. It doesn't consult other trees, doesn't ask permission from the wind, doesn't wait for approval from the soil. It drives its roots deep into the earth, extends its branches toward the sky, and grows in majestic silence. Year after year, ring after ring of wisdom forms in its trunk. And nobody needs to know. Nobody needs to watch. The tree isn't performing for anyone. It's simply fulfilling its destiny. The same happens with the strong human being. They're too busy growing to waste time announcing their growth. Too busy becoming who they are to worry about convincing others of who they claim to be. And here's something most people don't understand. Silence isn't passivity. It's not absence. The silence of the strong is a presence so intense it needs no words. It's like the space between musical notes. It's precisely that space that gives the music meaning. Without silence, there would only be noise. Have you ever watched a true master at any craft? A seasoned artisan, a consummate artist, and authentic sage? There's an economy of movement in them, an economy of words. They don't waste energy on unnecessary gestures or empty speeches. Every action has weight. Every word has purpose. And between the actions and the words, there's a silence pregnant with meaning. Why? Because they've learned something fundamental. That true strength doesn't dissipate in 1,000 directions. It concentrates, focuses, intensifies. And silence is the furnace where that concentration happens. When you're constantly talking, constantly explaining, constantly justifying yourself, you're leaking your energy. You're spilling your power like water through your fingers. But when you learn to contain it, to hold it, to let the power accumulate within you in silence, then you become a force of nature. But listen carefully, and this is crucial. There's a massive difference between the silence of strength and the silence of weakness. The weak also stay quiet, but out of fear, out of insecurity, out of having nothing to say. That's an empty silence, a silence that's merely absence. The silence of the strong, by contrast, is a conscious choice. It's a full silence, vibrant, brimming with unrealized possibilities. It's the silence of someone who could speak, but chooses not to, who could act, but chooses to wait for the exact right moment. There's an ancient wisdom that says the deepest ocean is the quietest. Ever notice that? Shallow waters make noise at the slightest breeze. They foam, they churn, they make a big show. But the deep ocean? The deep ocean remains undisturbed. Storms may tear at the surface, but down there, in the abyssal depths, a primordial and absolute silence reigns. So it is with human strength. Superficial strength is loud, reactive, always defending itself, always explaining itself. But deep strength, the strength that comes from an examined life, from inner battles won, from values forged in the fire of experience, that strength is silent as the ocean floor. And you know what happens when you develop that depth? You stop reacting to every provocation. You stop feeling the need to correct every misunderstanding. You stop caring about the small offenses, the petty misinterpretations, the trivial dramas that consume the energy of the weak. This isn't indifference. It's not coldness. It's discernment. It's the ability to distinguish between what deserves your attention and what's just passing noise. It's understanding that your inner peace is worth more than any victory in a trivial argument. Think about it. How many times have you seen people wasting hours, days, sometimes years of their lives on meaningless conflicts, trying to prove a point, trying to win an argument, trying to make someone admit they were wrong? And for what? What was really gained? The strong see the futility of it all. They see clearly that most human conflicts are just ego clashing against ego, like waves crashing against rocks. Lots of noise, lots of foam, but in the end, nothing substantial happens. So they choose silence, not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. They understand that there are battles you win by not fighting, arguments you win by not arguing, proofs you offer by not proving. Have you noticed how the most insecure people are the ones who talk about themselves the most? It's as if they need to construct their identity through words, through the stories they tell about who they are. But those stories are fragile, dependent on others' belief to hold them up. The strong don't need to narrate their story. Their life is the story. Their actions speak so loudly that their words become almost unnecessary. And when they do speak, when they finally choose to speak, people listen. Why? Because their words are rare, therefore precious. Because they come from a place of depth, not superficiality. There's another aspect of silence we need to explore. Silence as self-discipline. Look, controlling your tongue is one of the hardest and most important forms of self-mastery. Words are easy to produce, but impossible to retrieve once released into the world. They're like arrows. Once shot, there's no bringing them back. The weak let their words fly without thinking. They react. They don't respond. They're controlled by their emotions, by their impulses, by the neurotic need to fill every silence with some sound. But the strong have learned to create a space between stimulus and response. In that space, they examine, is it worth speaking? What will be gained? Is this the right time? Are these the right words? And frequently, very frequently, the answer is no. Silence serves better here. This requires tremendous strength. It requires you to go against your most basic impulses. It requires you to tolerate the discomfort of not defending yourself, not explaining yourself, letting others think whatever they want to think. And few, very few, have that strength. But those who develop it, they discover something extraordinary. They discover that when you stop wasting energy on unnecessary conversations, 1,000 unnecessary justifications, 1,000 empty arguments, you become weak. But when you learn to contain it, to focus it, to channel it through silence, you become an irresistible force. And there's yet another aspect of silence we need to explore. Silence as protection. You know, when you talk too much, you reveal too much. You hand over your vulnerabilities, your fears, your strategies, your dreams, and not everyone deserves that access. Not everyone will honor that information. The strong understand this. They know that silence is in part a form of self-preservation. They don't cast their pearls before swine, as the saying goes. They don't share their inner treasures with just anyone who shows up. They're selective, careful, discerning. But let me clarify something absolutely fundamental, so there's no misunderstanding. When I speak of the silence of the strong, I'm not glorifying repression. I'm not saying you should swallow your truths, suffocate your authentic voice, or live in fear of expressing yourself. No. 1,000 times no. The silence I'm talking about doesn't come from fear, but from strength. It doesn't come from the inability to speak, but from the capacity to choose not to speak. There's an astronomical difference between these two things. The repressed person stays quiet because they fear the consequences. The strong person stays quiet because they recognize that some battles aren't worth fighting, some words aren't worth saying, some stages don't deserve their performance. Think of a lion. It doesn't roar at every small animal that crosses its path. It doesn't need to. It's not proving anything to anyone. But when it roars, when it finally roars, the entire savanna trembles. Every creature knows something significant is happening. So it should be with you. Your voice, when used, should carry the weight of authenticity, the force of conviction, the power of lived truth. And that's only possible when you don't waste it on trivialities. There are people who talk so much their words lose all meaning. They become just background noise, like the buzzing of a mosquito, annoying but fundamentally ignorable. Nobody really listens. Nobody really cares, because there are so many words that none of them have weight. But when someone who normally keeps silence finally speaks, the world stops to listen. Why? Because rarity confers value. Because the previous silence gave weight to the present word. Because there's a sense that something truly important is being communicated. You want real influence? Want your words to actually matter? Then learn to use silence as a frame that gives value to your speech. Learn that less is more, that quality infinitely surpasses quantity. And here's something that might seem paradoxical. Silence is also the doorway to the deepest authenticity. See, when you're constantly talking, constantly performing, constantly maintaining a narrative about yourself, you get trapped in that narrative. You become a slave to your own story. But in silence, you can finally hear your own true voice. Not the voice you think you should have, not the voice others expect you to have, but your authentic voice, rising from the depths of your being. This is perhaps the most important reason why the strong choose silence, because it's in silence that they find themselves. It's in quietness that they can hear the inner wisdom that's drowned out by the constant noise of the external world. Imagine a spring of pure water at the bottom of a lake. While the surface is churned by waves and storms, you can't see the spring. But when the surface calms, when there's stillness, you can finally see the clear water rising from the depths. So it is with your inner wisdom, your authentic strength, your true self. They're always there, always present, but they're obscured by constant noise. The external noise of the world's demands, but also the internal noise of your own incessant thoughts, your worries, your self-imposed narratives. Silence calms the surface, and in the calm surface you can finally see and access the depths. That's why all the great wisdom traditions in one way or another value silence, not as an end in itself, but as a means of accessing something greater, as a doorway to deeper dimensions of human experience. The strong intuit this. They may not articulate it this way, but they sense there's something precious in silence. They sense that when they stop talking, something more essential can emerge, a clarity, a certainty, a strength that needs no words. And that silent strength has a magnetic quality. Have you noticed how the loudest people, the ones trying hardest to get attention, are often the most ignored? While those who remain quiet, who have that quality of silent presence, naturally draw attention? It's almost as if there's a universal law. The more you chase attention, the more it runs from you. But when you become complete in yourself, when you find peace in your own silence, attention comes naturally. But, and this is crucial, for the truly strong person, that attention doesn't matter anymore. They weren't seeking it, so they're not corrupted by it when it arrives. It doesn't define their worth, doesn't feed their ego, doesn't determine their actions. Let me take you even deeper. There's a form of power the world recognizes, the noisy power, the power that announces itself, that imposes itself, that dominates through brute force or calculated manipulation. That's the power of the weak masquerading as strong. They may build empires, may accumulate wealth, may command crowds, but internally they remain empty, insecure, dependent on external validation. And then there's the silent power, the power that comes from a life lived in alignment with your deepest values, the power that comes from knowing yourself, from having faced your inner demons and emerged transformed, the power that needs nothing from the external world to feel whole. This second type of power can't be bought, can't be stolen, can't be given or taken away. It can only be earned through the hard, silent work of self-transformation. And those who possess it recognize each other, not through words or grand gestures, but through a subtle quality of presence. It's like two martial arts masters meeting. They don't need to fight to know each other's level. There's an immediate, silent recognition, a mutual reverence that requires no demonstration. Now, I want you to understand something. Choosing silence doesn't mean abandoning the world or becoming a hermit. It doesn't mean you never speak, never act, never take a stand. That would just be another form of weakness, the weakness of escape. No. The strong remain in the world, fully engaged, fully present, but they operate from a different place. They're not constantly reacting, constantly defending themselves, constantly proving their worth. They act when action is needed, speak when speech is needed, but always with economy, always with purpose. There's a natural rhythm to this, like breathing, inhalation and exhalation, contraction and expansion, silence and speech. The problem with most people is they get stuck in constant exhalation. They never inhale. They never withdraw into silence to recharge, to reconnect with their inner source of strength. So they burn out. They become empty. And then they desperately seek something external to fill them. Attention, approval, drama, conflict, anything to feel alive, to feel real. But the strong have learned the complete rhythm. They know when to speak and when to be silent, when to act and when to wait, when to reveal themselves and when to conceal themselves. And this fluency, this ability to dance between opposites, is the mark of true mastery. Think of an experienced warrior. They're not constantly brandishing their sword. Most of the time, the sword remains sheathed. But when it's drawn, every movement counts. There's no waste, no hesitation, no doubt. You see, the strength of action comes from the silence that precedes it. The strength of the word comes from the silence that frames it. They're not opposites, but complements, the yang and yin of authentic power. And there's yet another aspect of silence I want to explore. Silence as an act of faith in yourself. When you choose not to defend yourself against an unjust accusation, when you choose not to explain yourself in the face of a misunderstanding, when you choose to let your results speak for themselves instead of announcing them, you're making a tremendous act of faith. You're saying, I trust that my truth will eventually be recognized. I trust that my work will speak for itself. I trust that those who need to understand me will understand me, and those who don't, well, maybe it's not important that they do. This requires colossal inner strength. It requires you to endure misunderstanding, sometimes slander, sometimes unjust judgment, without striking back, without lowering yourself to the level of those who attack you. And you know what happens when you develop this capacity? You become virtually invulnerable. Because how do you hurt someone who doesn't respond? How do you provoke someone who doesn't react? How do you diminish someone who isn't seeking your approval? Silence, in this sense, is impenetrable armor, not because it protects you from being attacked, but because it makes the attacks irrelevant. The arrows are fired, but they find no target, because you're no longer playing the game where those arrows have power. If you made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed and left a like on the video. Share in the comments how this video might have opened your mind, and feel free to tell your own story so we can talk about it together. I'll see you in the next reflection.